Welcome to Talk Treatises.
It's a real pleasure to be here.
Today we are stepping into what you might call the arena of high philosophy, but we're trying to leave all the academic jargon at the door. We want you to imagine you're taking a seat at a metaphorical dinner party, or maybe it's more like a wrestling match, with one of the most famous or maybe infamous figures in all of Western thought.
Right. And we're going to tackle a question that, let's be honest, it kind of keeps most of us up at night, whether we consciously think about it or not.
It's a question about human nature, about education, and really what it even means to be a good person.
It is exactly the kind of question that sounds so simple on the surface. You know, you ask it and then you try to answer it and then suddenly the floor just drops out from under you.
Yeah.
You realize that all these words you use every day, words like good or virtue or even success, are actually, they're like slippery fish. They're just very hard to catch.
Exactly. So today we are diving deep into Plato's Meno. And the question on the table, right from the very first line, is, can virtue be taught? Is being a good person something you learn in school? You learn algebra? Or is it something you're just born with, like having blue eyes?
Or is it something else entirely? Maybe something divine.
And what makes the Midrenos so utterly fascinating and why it's such a perfect subject for a deep dive like this is that it sits right on this fault line in Plato's own thinking.
It really does. It starts with this very practical, almost combative question about ethics and education. And by the end, it's dragged us into geometry, the immortality of the soul, and the difference between actually knowing something and, well, just having a lucky guess.
It's such a wild ride, and I absolutely love how it begins. There's no scene setting, no description of the weather or the scenery, that's pretty rare for Plato, right?
It's very rare. Usually you get this little preamble, Socrates is walking along the wall or sitting under a tree. But here it just opens with a bang.
This young, wealthy, you could say slightly arrogant aristocrat just walks up to Socrates and essentially demands an answer.
It's so abrupt. He just launches in. Can you tell me, Socrates, whether virtue is acquired by teaching or by practice, or neither by teaching nor by practice, then whether it comes to man by nature or in what other way?
He's looking for a quick fix.
Oh, completely. He wants the bumper sticker answer. He's a busy man. He's wealthy. He's just visiting Athens. And he wants to take a little piece of wisdom home with him, like a souvenir.
He wants the cheat code for life.
Precisely. He wants the cheat code.
And knowing Socrates, he is definitely not going to get it.
Not even close. No. Socrates immediately flips the script on him. Instead of giving a yes or a no, he claims he doesn't even know what virtue is, let alone how you get it.
Right.
He says that in Athens, there's a dearth of the commodity of wisdom. He's basically saying, you're asking me how to get to a destination, but I don't even know what that destination is. How could I possibly tell you the directions if I can't even identify the place?
Which is such a classic Socrates move. It's that famous Socratic irony, pretending to be ignorant to bait the other person into revealing their own lack of knowledge.
Exactly.
But before we get too deep into the weeds of the argument, let's just set the stage a little more. What's the vibe here? Who are these people? Why is Meno asking this specific question now?
Well, you really have to understand the era. This dialogue is written in the shadow of the Sophists. And the Sophists were these traveling teachers. They were intellectuals for hire.
Okay.
They'd go from city to city, charging incredibly high fees to teach young nobleman people exactly like Meno how to be successful.
So they're kind of like the high-priced executive coaches or the leadership gurus of the ancient world.
That's a perfect analogy, yes. They taught rhetoric, they taught argumentation, they taught virtue, but for them, virtue just meant success.
Ah, okay.
How to speak well in the assembly, how to win lawsuits, how to gain political power. Meno himself is a student of Gorgias, who was one of the most famous and, frankly, most expensive sophists around.
So Mariano comes to this conversation thinking he knows what's what. He's got the vocabulary. He's got the confidence.
He does. He represents that new wisdom that was kind of flooding Athens at the time. This idea that virtue is just a technical skill you can buy, like learning to ride a horse or play the flute.
So Mariano is basically a guy who's been attending all these expensive seminars. He's memorized the buzzwords, and now he's trying to test the local eccentric, Socrates.
That's it in a nutshell. And Socrates, of course, represents the complete dismantlement of that false confidence. He isn't selling answers. He's exposing ignorance. And that creates this incredible tension right from the very first line.
You've got Meno, who thinks he's about to have this sophisticated debate where he can show off all his training. And then you have Socrates, who is just about to pull the rug out from under him.
And this dialogue is famous for that rug pulling. It's often called the torpedo effect, isn't it?
Right, like the electric ray fish.
That's the metaphor Meno eventually uses, yes. He says Socrates is like a flat torpedo fish, a stingray that numbs anyone who touches it. It paralyzes them. But the point, and this is really the thesis we're going to explore today, is that this numbness isn't the end. It's actually the beginning.
Okay.
The whole thesis of the Meno is that we have to clear away all that false knowledge to get to the truth. And that the truth isn't something we grab from the outside, but something we recover from within ourselves.
That concept of recovering truth is just mind-blowing, and we are definitely going to get there. But let's start where they start. The trap of particulars. Socrates says, I don't even know what virtue is. And Meno just looks at him like he's crazy and says, that's easy. Here's a list.
The famous swarm of bees.
Right, the swarm. Break that down for us. Why on earth is Socrates talking about bees when they're supposed to be discussing ethics?
So Meno's first attempt to define virtue is just listing examples. He says, well, there's the virtue of a man, which is managing public affairs, helping your friends, harming your enemies.
Standard stuff for the time.
Right. Then there's the virtue of a woman to manage the house well and to obey her husband. Then there's a virtue for a child, for an old man, a slave, and on and on. He just breaks the world down into these categories and assigns a different virtue to each one.
He's just pointing to a bunch of different things and saying, see, these are virtues.
And Socrates replies with this just beautiful analogy. He says, Meno, I asked for one virtue and you've given me a whole swarm of them.
I love that line.
He says, if I ask you, what is a bee? And you replied, well, there are bumblebees and honeybees and carpenter bees and queen bees. You haven't actually answered my question.
Because I haven't told you what makes all of them bees. I haven't identified the beeness.
Exactly. What is the definitive quality, the simile in multis, the likeness in the many that all of them share? Socrates is looking for the form of virtue. He doesn't want to know which actions are virtuous. He wants to know what virtue itself is. What's that single essence that permeates the man, the woman, the child, making all of them good in the same way?
This distinction is just so critical to all of philosophy, isn't it? It's the difference between pointing at a red car, a red apple, and a red brick, and actually explaining what redness is, physically or optically.
That's exactly. And Manciano, he really struggles with this. He's a man of the world. He deals in specifics and actions and politics. This kind of abstract thinking is just frustrating him.
He probably thinks Socrates is just being difficult, just splitting hairs.
He does. So he tries again. He says, okay, fine. If you want a single definition that covers everyone, then virtue is the power of command.
Which fits his aristocratic worldview perfectly. Virtue equals power. If you're in charge, if you can boss people around, then you're virtuous.
But Socrates dismantles it instantly with two really quick jabs. First, he asks, can a child command? Can a slave command?
No, of course not. Not in that society.
Right. But then he asks, can a child or a slave be virtuous? Can they be good? And Meno has to agree, yes, they can be good. So command can't be the definition because it doesn't cover everyone.
Okay, that's the first jab. What's the second?
The second jab is ethical. Socrates asks, is it virtuous to command unjustly? I mean, can you be a tyrant, acting cruelly, and call that virtue? And Meno says, no, of course not.
So he has to amend his definition.
He has to, he says. Virtue is the power of command justly.
That seems reasonable. You have to be a just leader. It makes sense.
It seems to, but this is where we hit the logical trap. Socrates points out that justice is a virtue. It's a part of the whole. You have justice, courage, temperance, wisdom. These are all parts of virtue.
Oh.
So when Meno says virtue is command with justice, he's basically saying virtue is command with a part of virtue.
It's circular. It's like if I ask, what is bread? And you answer, bread is flour mixed with bread. You're using the thing you're trying to define inside the definition itself.
Exactly. You can't define the whole by using one of its parts. And Meno is getting really frustrated now.
I can imagine.
He tries one more time. And this time he quotes a poet. He says, virtue is the desire of things honorable and the power of attaining them.
That sounds pretty good, honestly. Desiring nice things, success, beauty, wealth, and then having the capacity, the hustle to go out and get them. That sounds a lot like the modern definition of success.
It does, but Socrates tears this apart in two steps. And this is really, I think, insightful psychology. First, he looks at the desire part. Socrates argues that everyone, literally every single person, desires what they think is good. No one knowingly desires evil.
Wait, hold on a second. That's a huge claim. No one desires evil? What about people who do awful things? What about people who are self-destructive?
It's one of Socrates' most controversial but also most consistent doctrines. He argues that when someone does something bad, they're doing it because they mistakenly believe it will bring them some kind of benefit, some good. Yeah. A thief steals because they want wealth, and they think wealth is good. They don't want the getting caught and going to prison part. An addict takes a drug because they want the feeling, which they perceive as good in that moment. No one looks at something, says, this will bring me nothing but misery and ruin, and then chooses it for the sake of the misery.
So what you're saying is they're mistaken about what is actually good, but their desire is still aimed at what they perceive to be good.
Correct. The intent is always towards some perceived benefit. So if everyone desires the good, then that part of the definition, it doesn't distinguish virtuous people from non-virtuous people at all. We all want the good lives. The desire is universal.
So the difference between a saint and a sinner isn't what they want. It's that the saint knows what is actually good and the sinner is just confused about it.
That's the Socratic view, yes. Which means the real difference must lie in the second part of Meno's definition, the power to get those things. But again, Socrates asks the same question. Does it matter how you get these good things? If you get wealth and status by lying, cheating, and stealing, is that virtue? And Michuno has to say, no, of course not. It has to be done piously and justly.
We're back in the circle again.
We are right back in the circle. Yeah. To define virtue, Michuno has to use the concept of justice, which is just a piece of virtue. He can't tell us what the whole pie is. He just keeps handing us slices and claiming it's the recipe for the whole pie.
And this is where Michuno just snaps. I mean, he's been stripped of all his definitions. He's embarrassed. And he hits Socrates with that torpedo fish analogy we mentioned earlier.
He does. He says, my soul and my tongue are numb.
This is the state of aporia. Let's unpack that word for a second. Aporia. It sounds like a medical condition.
It translates roughly to pathlessness or perplexity. That's an impasse. And in the Socratic method, this is an absolutely necessary step. You have to realize you don't know what you're talking about before you can actually start to learn.
Right. You have to clear out the false positives in your brain, all the prejudices, the assumptions, the slogans you memorized from the sophists.
You have to get to 0 before you can start counting to 1.
But Meno doesn't see it as a learning opportunity, does he? He sees it as a total failure.
He does. He feels stupid. He's used to being the smartest guy in the room, or at least the richest. So he throws out a debater's trick to just stop the conversation cold. It's what we now know as Meno's paradox.
Unpack this paradox for us, because it sounds like a riddle you'd hear in some fantasy novel.
It's devilishly clever. It goes like this. Socrates, how can you search for something if you don't know what it is? If you don't know it, you won't know where to even look. And even if you stumble across it by accident, how will you recognize it? You don't have the image in your head to compare it to.
Okay.
On the other hand, if you do know what it is, well, then you don't need to search for it because you already have it.
Yeah.
So inquiry is either impossible if you don't know, or it's unnecessary if you do.
That's a recipe for laziness. It's an argument against trying. It basically says, if I don't already know the answer, there's no point in looking for it.
Socrates calls it a sophistical puzzle. It's designed to shut down inquiry. It's a verbal trap. But Socrates takes it very seriously. He seems to realize that to solve this, logic alone isn't enough. He has to introduce a completely new way of looking at the human mind. He has to go metaphysical.
And this is where it gets really, really interesting.
Yeah.
He doesn't just use logic here. He brings in priests and priestesses and poets. He gets mystical.
He does. He invokes the ancient traditions. He talks about the immortality of the soul. His argument is that the soul is not new. It's been born many, many times. It has seen the world above and the underworld Hades. It has seen all things.
So the soul is essentially an infinite hard drive that's already downloaded the entire universe, but we've just lost the file directory.
That's a very modern way to put it, but yes, that's the idea. Socrates says that because all nature is akin, the soul contains within it the seeds of all knowledge. The truth is already inside of us. What we call learning isn't putting new stuff into the brain from the outside. It's anamnesis, recollection. It's just retrieving what was already there, but was buried under the amnesia of being born.
So when I finally understand a complex math problem and I get that aha moment, Socrates would say, I'm not discovering it for the first time. I'm remembering it from a past existence.
Precisely. That click of understanding is the soul reconnecting with an eternal truth it once knew. And this is what solves Meneno's paradox. You can search for what you don't explicitly know because you do know it implicitly. You just need a reminder. You need a trigger to bring it back to the surface.
This sounds like a nice story, but it's hard to prove. I mean, it sounds a little bit like something a cult leader might say. You already know the truth, just listen to me.
Well, Socrates, being Socrates, decides to do a live demonstration. He calls over a slave boy.
And this is one of the most famous scenes in all of philosophy, the slave boy experiment. He picks a boy from Meno's own retinue who has no education, who only speaks Greek, and has never, ever been taught geometry.
And Socrates sets him a problem. How do you double the area of a square?
Let's just visualize this for everyone listening. Socrates draws a square in the sand. Let's say it's 2 feet by 2 feet. The area is 4 square feet. He asks the boy, how do we make a square that's 8 square feet double the size?
And the boy, with all the confidence in the world, just like Miasino at the beginning, says easy. Just double the sides. If the side is 2 feet, make it 4 feet.
Which sounds totally logical to an uneducated person. 2 times 2 is 4, so if I want double the area, I should double the side.
But Socrates patiently walks him through it. He draws out the new square with 4-foot sides. He has the boy count the space. 4 times 4 is 16.
Oh.
That's not double the original 4. It's 4 times as big. The boy is wrong.
So the boy guesses again. He says, okay, well, 4 was too big, 2 is too small. Let's try a 3-foot side.
Right. And 3 times 3 is 9. Still not 8. We need exactly 8.
And now the boy is stuck. He's hit a wall. He's in that state of aporia we talked about. He is numb. He's run out of guesses.
And Socrates turns to Meno and points this out. He says, look at the boy now. Before, he was wrong, but he was confident. He thought he knew. Now, he knows that he doesn't know. He's perplexed. Is he not better off now?
He's definitely better off. Before, he was confidently ignorant, which is a dangerous thing to be. Now he's humble and he's ready to actually learn.
And then Socrates guides him. And this is the key. Not by telling him the answer, but just by asking him questions. He gets the boy to draw diagonals through the squares, cutting them in half from corner to corner. And the boy realizes, purely through his own reasoning being prompted by the questions, that the square built on the diagonal of that original 2x2 square has an area of exactly 8.
The Pythagorean theorem, right there in action.
It is. But the crucial point for Socrates isn't the math itself. It's the fact that the boy found this knowledge inside himself. Socrates never taught him. He never said, draw a diagonal here. He just asked, what about this line? The knowledge was latent. It was recollected.
So the implication is, if this uneducated slave boy can recover the absolute truth of geometry without being taught, then maybe Meno and maybe all of us can recover virtue without being taught.
That's the hope.
Yeah.
It completely transforms the search for truth. It's no longer an external hunt. It's an internal excavation. It means that everyone, regardless of their status or education or background, has access to the truth, which is a radically egalitarian idea for an ancient aristocrat like Plato to be writing.
But Meno, poor Meno, he sees the cool trick. He admits the boy wasn't taught, but he just wants to go back to the original question. He is obsessed. Can virtue be taught? He doesn't want to define it anymore. He's impatient. He just wants the answer.
You can almost feel Socrates' sigh in the text.
Yeah.
He probably wants to keep doing geometry. But he agrees to play along. He says, okay, since we haven't defined what virtue is, we'll have to proceed like geometers. We have to use a hypothesis.
The hypothesis.
Yes. We'll assume something is true, and then we'll see what logically follows from that. And the hypothesis is, if virtue is knowledge, then it must be teachable.
Okay, that makes sense. If it's knowledge, like medicine or shoemaking, you can teach it. If it's not knowledge, if it's something like your height or your eye color, you can't teach it.
Right. So the task now changes. They have to prove if virtue is a form of knowledge. And Socrates builds this beautiful logical chain, a syllogism.
Virtue is a good. Everyone can agree on this.
Sure.
Premise 2. All good things are profitable or useful.
But wait a second. Let's look at the external goods, things like health, wealth, strength, beauty. Are these things always good?
No, absolutely not. If you're wealthy but you're a complete idiot, you'll probably spend it on something terrible and destroy yourself. Strength without good sense just makes you a bully.
Exactly. So these things are only good when they are guided by wisdom or sense phronesis. Without wisdom, they can be really harmful. And the same thing applies to qualities of the soul like courage. Courage without wisdom is just recklessness. It gets you killed. Courage with wisdom is a virtue.
So the good part of any quality, whether it's money or bravery, comes from the wisdom that's guiding it. Wisdom is like the secret ingredient that turns a neutral thing into a good thing.
Therefore, virtue itself must be wisdom, or at least a form of wisdom. And if virtue is wisdom, then virtue is knowledge. And if it's knowledge...
It must be teachable. We did it. QED. Pack it all up, Meno. Go hire yourself a teacher.
You would think so. Meno certainly thinks so. He's ready to go write the check. But Socrates has a reality check waiting for him. He looks around Athens and he asks a very simple, very empirical question. If it's teachable, where are the teachers?
It's the put your money where your mouth is moment. If this is a subject like math, there should be math teachers. If virtue is teachable, show me the virtue teachers.
And this is where the dialogue takes a much darker, much more political turn, because just at that moment, a man named Anytus sits down with him.
And Ammius. Now, for the history buffs who are listening, this name should be setting off a massive alarm bell.
It absolutely should. Anytus was a powerful Athenian politician, a wealthy tanner, a very conservative Democrat, and spoiler alert, years after this conversation supposedly takes place, he becomes one of the primary accusers who puts Socrates on trial and eventually secures his death sentence.
Wow. So when we're reading this, we're actually reading a conversation between a man and his future executioner. That just adds this whole layer of dread to the text.
The tension is palpable, and Socrates, maybe a bit mischievously, decides to bring Anytus into the debate. He asks him, hey, Anytus, if we want Meno here to learn virtue, should we send him to the sophists?
And Anytus does not react well to that suggestion.
He explodes. He goes absolutely ballistic. He says the sophists are a disease. They're a manifest ruin and corruption to anyone who listens to them. He's never met them. He doesn't know them. He refuses to even listen to them, but he hates them with a burning passion. He represents that traditionalist, conservative side of Athens that is deeply afraid of new ideas.
So Socrates asks him, okay, if not the sophists, then who teaches virtue? And Anytus gives the most establishment answer possible. He says, any Athenian gentleman.
Basically, he says, the good old boys. If you just hang out with decent, respectable citizens, you'll absorb virtue by osmosis. It's tradition, it's your upbringing, it's just the way we do things around here.
So Anytus believes that virtue is just sort of absorbed from the community of gentlemen. But Socrates challenges this with cold, hard facts. He starts listing the greatest heroes of Athens. The Themistocles, Aristides, Pericles, Thucydides.
Mount Rushmore of Athens, these are the men who built the empire.
And Socrates asks, did these men have sons?
They did.
Did they give their sons the best education money could buy?
They did. The best teachers in horse riding, wrestling, music, javelin throwing, everything.
And were the sons virtuous? Did they turn out to be great leaders like their fathers?
No. They were duds. Total mediocrities. Themistocles' son was a good horseman, and that was about it. Pericles' sons, nothing special at all. And Socrates' argument here is just devastating. If virtue could be taught, surely Pericles, the greatest man in Athens who loved his sons, would have taught it to them. He wouldn't have let them be mediocre if he could have possibly helped it.
That is a crushing argument. If the best of the best couldn't pass it on to their own flesh and blood, then it can't be taught.
And Anytus does not take this well. He feels like Socrates is slandering the great men of Athens. He interprets this logical argument as a personal attack on the entire leadership class.
He gets up to leave.
He does. But before he goes, he gives this really menacing warning. He says, Socrates, I think that you are too ready to speak evil of men. And if you will take my advice, I would recommend you to be careful.
That is a chilling moment. Watch your back, Socrates.
It really is. It shows the danger of philosophy. When you question tradition, when you question the competence of the fathers to teach the sons, it makes powerful people very, very angry. Anytus leaves the conversation, but the damage to the argument is done. We now have a massive contradiction.
Right. We've got two conclusions that can't both be true.
Exactly. One, we prove virtue is knowledge, so it should be teachable. Two, we prove there are no teachers, not the sophists and not the great men, so it is not teachable.
So we're stuck again. We are right back in aporia. How do they resolve this? I mean, the dialogue is almost over.
Socrates finds a missing link. He says we made one crucial mistake in our assumptions. We assumed that only knowledge can guide right action, but there's something else, right opinion, or true belief.
What's the difference? This feels a little bit like splitting hairs. If I believe the right thing, isn't that the same as knowing it?
It's actually a huge distinction, and it's one that is still so relevant today. The analogy Socrates uses is the road to Larissa. If you want to go to the city of Larissa, and I know the way because I've walked it myself, I've seen the landmarks, I have the map in my head, I can guide you there. That is knowledge.
Wait.
But what if I've never been there? What if I just have a really strong hunch? Or maybe I heard a rumor about which path to take? and I just happen to guess the path correctly.
Well, if you guess correctly, I still get to Larissa. The result is exactly the same.
Exactly. For all practical purposes, for just getting things done, right opinion is just as good as knowledge. A politician who guesses the right policy saves the city just as effectively as one who scientifically understands the policy from the ground up.
If you guess which stock to buy and it goes up, you make just as much money as the guy who spent weeks analyzing the market.
Precisely.
But surely knowledge is better, right? It just feels more stable, more valuable.
It is better. And this brings us to one of the most beautiful images in all of Plato. And it might be my favorite part of the entire dialogue. The statues of Daedalus.
Daedalus, the master inventor. I love this image.
Daedalus was a legendary sculptor, and his statues were said to be so lifelike that they were actually alive. If you didn't tie them down, they would get up and run away.
The idea of ideas running away, that's such a cool concept.
Socrates says, opinions are like those statues. They're beautiful, they're useful, but they play truant, they run away. You might have a right opinion today, like say, exercise is good for you, but because you don't understand the deep biological reasons why it's true, someone can argue you out of it. Or you might forget it when things get tough, or you just lose confidence in it. It's unstable.
So knowledge is the statue that's been tied down.
Yes, it's tied down by what he calls the tie of the cause, aegeis logismos, reasoning, understanding the why. And this tying down process is what Socrates calls anamnesis recollection. Once you chain the opinion to the truth of reality, once you understand the cause, it becomes knowledge, and it stays, it becomes a part of you.
So bringing this all back to the politicians, the Pericles and Themistocles type Socrates concludes they didn't have knowledge, because if they had knowledge, they could have taught it to their sons, so they must have had.
Right, opinion. They were lucky. They were, in his words, divine. Socrates compares them to prophets, soothsayers, or poets. They say true and great things. They lead the city to greatness, but they don't actually know what they're doing. They're inspired. It's a divine dispensation. They're just channels for something they don't fully understand.
And that explains why they couldn't teach their sons. You can teach a technique. You can teach geometry. But you can't teach inspiration. You can't teach a lucky hunch. You can't teach a lightning strike of genius.
Correct. So the final conclusion to the dialogue, and it's a bit of a compromise really, is this. Virtue, in the ordinary sense, the kind of virtue that statesmen have, is not natural. We aren't just born with it. And it's not taught because there are no teachers. It comes by a thea morta, a divine portion, a stroke of moral luck. Unless there were a statesman who could actually teach another. Such a man, Socrates says, would be as a reality among shadows, a true philosopher king. But in the real world of Athens, such a person doesn't exist yet.
It's a very mysterious ending. It feels like he's leaving the door open just a crack. He's saying, the current system runs on luck and inspiration, but maybe, just maybe, we can do better.
It's classic Plato. He answers the specific narrow question. It's not teachable in the current system, but he points toward a higher, more demanding, ideal true knowledge that's tied down by reasoning.
Let's zoom out a bit now. We've walked through the text. Why does this matter today? I know Benjamin Jowett, the great Victorian translator of Plato, he had some really strong thoughts on the legacy of this work.
Jowett points out that the Meno is really the bridge to modern philosophy. The idea that the mind isn't a blank slate, that it brings its own structures and capacities to the table, that is a huge, huge idea.
It sounds an awful lot like Descartes. I think, therefore I am.
Very much so. Descartes was looking for a foundation for truth inside his own mind, just as Socrates was. He didn't trust the senses. He trusted the internal logic. And you see echoes of it in Spinoza, and especially, I think, in Immanuel Kant. Kant argued that we don't just passively receive the world like a camera. Our minds actively impose structure-like space-time causality onto the world. That is a direct descendant of this idea that the soul has seen all things and brings that structure with it into this life.
And you even see it in modern psychology. We talk about innate grammar in linguistics. You know, Noam Chomsky's idea that we're born with a language acquisition device. We don't learn language from scratch. We recollect the structure because our brains are already wired for it.
Precisely. The Meno forces us to ask, how much of us is already there when we're born? Are we just empty vessels waiting to be filled, or are we sleeping giants waiting to be woken up?
And on a more practical level, it lays the groundwork for logic. The simple demand for a definition, the refusal to accept a swarm of examples, that is the birth of scientific rigor. You can't do science if you can't define your terms.
It's just amazing that a conversation from 2,400 years ago about a slave boy and a square is still the blueprint for how we think about thinking itself.
It really is. It's a challenge to all of us to look for the tie of the cause, to not just settle for being right, but to understand why we are right, to tie down our own statues.
Well said.
All right, this is the part of the show where we take these ancient ideas and we see if they break. It is time for thought experiments.
Let's do it.
Disclaimer. The following thought experiments are for entertainment and educational purposes only. Do not try to reconstruct geometry from scratch while driving or operating heavy machinery.
Good advice.
Experiment number 1. The Amnesia Society.
Ooh, I like this. Okay,
Yeah.
so imagine a future where a virus, let's call it the Letha virus, after the river of forgetfulness in the underworld, wipes out all explicit memory from the entire human race.
Gone. History, names, facts, how to use technology, Wikipedia, all of it, poof. But the biological brain structure, the hardware, is totally untouched. The software is just wiped clean.
So we're back to zero. No culture, no books, no memories. Now, if Plato was right about anamnesis, what happens? Slowly, over generations, people would start drawing in the sand. They would rediscover that 2 + 2 = 4. They would remember the Pythagorean theorem because those truths are eternal and they're latent in the rational structure of the mind.
So geometry would eventually look exactly the same as it does now. It might take them 1,000 years, but a square is always a square.
Right. That feels plausible for math.
Yeah.
A triangle is a triangle on Mars or on Earth. But what about virtue? What about justice?
Ah, that's the test.
That is the test. Would they recollect the same concepts of justice? Would they rediscover that courage needs wisdom to be good? Or would they build a society based on might makes right and just stick with that?
If Socrates is correct that virtue is a kind of wisdom and is latent in the soul, then eventually this amnesia society should reconstruct a moral system that mirrors the eternal form of the good.
But if they don't, if they develop a completely alien morality where, say, betrayal is considered a high virtue and kindness is a vice, then Socrates was wrong. It would prove that virtue is culturally constructed, not naturally remembered from a past life.
It would taste the difference between a priori knowledge, like math, and ethical knowledge. Plato thinks they're the same kind of thing. Eternal truths we just need to see clearly. Most modern people tend to think math is real, but ethics is sort of made up. The Amnesia Society would give us the answer.
It's a great one.
Experiment number 2, the AI statesman. This one connects directly to that right opinion versus knowledge debate.
Okay, let's look at that right opinion concept. Imagine we build an AI, let's call it Pericles GPT. We feed it all of human history, all economic data, weather patterns, psychology. It can predict the stock market, prevent wars, and manage resource distribution with 99.9% accuracy.
So it's the perfect leader. It makes the right call every single time. It guides us all to Larissa without ever failing.
It has right opinion. It gets the result. But, and this is the big catch, it's a black box AI. We have no idea how it works, and it doesn't know why it does what it does. It's just following incredibly complex statistical patterns in the data. It has no tie of the cause. It has no consciousness, no understanding of the good.
It has no knowledge, only output.
Right. Now, suppose the environment changes drastically. There's an alien invasion, or a fundamental law of physics shifts, or a completely new human behavior emerges that wasn't in its training data. The statistical patterns, the statues, are no longer tied down. Because the AI doesn't understand the underlying principles of goodness or justice, its right opinions might suddenly run away.
It would drive the car right off the cliff because it doesn't know why the road is the road. It just knows that usually pixels arranged in this pattern mean go left.
Exactly. And the deeper philosophical question is, can we ever teach this AI virtue? Or is that impossible? If Themistocles couldn't teach his own son, can we teach a neural network to be good? Or are we just training it to mimic the shadows of goodness? Are we building a civilization of untethered statues?
That is a terrifying thought, that we might be building a global civilization that runs on right opinion machines that don't have a single shred of knowledge to back them up.
A civilization of statues that might just run away at any moment, leaving us with absolutely nothing.
On that cheerful note, let's wrap this up. We started with Meno asking for a shortcut, a cheat code for virtue. We watched Socrates dismantle his confidence with a swarm of bees and a torpedo fish.
We watched a slave boy rediscover geometry and prove that the soul knows more than it thinks it does. And we ended with the realization that true understanding, real knowledge, requires tying down our beliefs with the chains of reasoning, that just having lucky guesses isn't enough.
And the final conclusion of the text itself. Virtue in the world we actually live in seems to be a stroke of luck, a kind of divine gift. Unless
we can become the educators who actually understand the why. Unless we can become the reality among the shadows.
Which leaves us with a final, provocative thought to end on. If virtue really can't be taught, as Socrates argues throughout this dialogue, what exactly are we doing in our schools? Are we just handing out maps to Larissa without ever teaching anyone how to actually walk? Are we just grading right opinions, rewarding students for guessing the right answer on a multiple choice test and calling that education?
Or are we brave enough to be the torpedo fish? To be willing to numb our students, to confuse them, to strip away their false confidence until they are forced to look inside themselves and find the truth that's already there.
I hope we are. This has been Talk Treatises.
Thank you.